Do you get the feeling there's a lot of mixed messaging when it comes to crocheting with cotton yarn? Well, you're right, there really is. You'll hear people simultaneously, on the one hand calling it soft and on the other hand describing it as hard. A person will tell you it's the best thing to use for your clothes because it's easy to wash. And someone else will be right in your other ear telling you that it's going to leach the dye everywhere. So what's true? Well, the issue is there are a lot of different kinds of cotton and cotton blend yarns, and all those things are true of some of them. If all this contradictory information is true, then how do we use cotton yarn to the best of our abilities? Well, I'm going to tell you how I use it, what my do's and don'ts for crocheting with cotton yarn are, and there's going to be some generalization thrown in, and I'll give you some examples, but hopefully you'll come away feeling more confident in both choosing and using the best cotton yarn for crochet. Do consider your budget. Now, one of the things that is very often, more often than not, true is that cotton yarn is more expensive than some other yarns that are available. Now, obviously, there is a wide range. There's a huge spectrum here from the cheapest to the most expensive, but on balance, cotton yarn is pricier. So if this is a tight budget project that you're looking for, then have a big think before you decide whether cotton yarns are the one you're going to go with for this one. I'll elaborate more on that in a minute because it's not that cut and dry really. Check the texture. I'm such a big texture person, I've got a lot of strong feelings on it, and categorically I love the texture of some cotton yarns and cannot stand the texture of other cotton yarns. However, as a general rule of thumb, they are not as soft as some other fibres. So that doesn't mean that they're all horrible to feel, but it means that the odds of you finding one that is going to slightly rub you up the wrong way is probably a bit higher with a cotton one. And here's how to get around that, and it's really simple. If you've already got the yarn, you just make up a swatch, have a rub with your hands, have a little rub on your face. It's always a great measure of whether you're going to like it. Run it between your fingers to make sure it's a texture that you're happy with, and then you'll know. Now, if you have not bought this one before, if you're buying it online and you can't touch it and feel it before you buy it, look at reviews. If people mention the texture as being a particular negative, it might be one that's worth steering away from. There are certain brands that are quite well known for being quite a rough texture. The Lily Sugar and Cream brand is a good example of that. Personally, yes, I do find it on the rougher side, but I'm actually still quite happy to work with it. But it is one that's well known for being a slightly more aggressive feel. If you're picking it up in the shop, take the skein, again, rub it on the back of your hand, rub it on your face if you're sure that no one's looking and your face is clean, and rub between your fingers if it's got any loose strand off it, just to see how it feels. I find personally, from that point, just off the skein, I don't really need to make a swatch to know if I'm going to get along with it. Do use an ergonomic hook. Now, cotton is quite a tough material because it's that little bit harder to work with, because it's that little bit tougher and less sort of give to the fibres. An ergonomic hook is the best way to go with cotton. Again, when you're buying a new skein, check for splitting and for fluffy bits. Sounds contradictory, right? But those are the two main complaints in terms of the integrity of the yarn that people tend to have. Personally, I see more splitting than I do fluffing of a cotton yarn, but it is one that comes up quite a lot when people are reviewing and talking about them. And again, that is something that you can eyeball if it is not appropriate to test, and if it is appropriate to test it, I like to get a strand of yarn between my fingers and go tug, 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 and have a look at how it is afterwards. I then like to take my two fingers and give a really good hard rub on the surface, so you're separating those individual strands of cotton, and it gives you just a good idea of how easily that's going to fluff up or burr or split. Double check the throat of your hook has no burrs. Because of this tendency to split, for some particular cotton yarns, it's a really good idea, and this is a good idea for any yarn, to be honest, I do it Every time I get a new hook, I check that the throat is smooth. So I take a strand of yarn and the hook and I run it backwards and forwards and make sure it doesn't catch on it at all. Feel inside, make sure it's completely smooth, and that's going to give you the best chance of a good experience working with the yarn. Use cotton yarn for structural projects. It is such a good fibre for things that are going to need to carry a bit of weight, like bags. It's my absolute go-to for making crochet bags. The Lily Sugar and Cream one, in fact, is really, really nice in my experience for that. It's got a bit more strength to it and it doesn't tend to stretch, which means it doesn't distort, and you're a lot less likely to lose your luggage out the bottom of the bag. It's a great one for bags, and it is a great one for things where you want it to retain the shape. However, on the flip side of that, do take into account the yarn's weight. I am not alone in being a person that has made a huge crochet blanket and found that it is really heavy because it's with a cotton yarn. The physical weight of the strand is greater for cotton because it is a physically heavier material, and that means that the same number of stitches as you make up with acrylic is going to be a heavier weight. Do check the weight of your skein compared with the yardage. Like I've just talked about before, you will find that you could have 100 grams of yarn in cotton and 100 grams of yarn in acrylic, and they have got really quite wildly different yardages because of the physical weight of the strands of the fibre. That means if you're making a particular project or following a pattern, it's a better idea to look at yardage rather than weight for how much you're going to need, because if the crochet pattern designer's made it with acrylic and then you're using cotton, you could end up needing more skeins of yarn to make the same size project. Do consider using it for practical things like coasters and mats, because it holds its structure and it's not too upset by a little bit of increased heat. It can be a great yarn to use for those practical projects. Placemats, table mats, coasters, it all looks lovely in. Years ago I made a really nice set of coasters. I have literally no idea what happened to them after I moved house. I need to make some more. But coasters are a great thing to make in a cotton yarn. Do use it if you want good stitch definition. There's a wide variety of acrylic and wool and other fibres available, and some variation through all of them in how defined the stitches are going to be. But in my experience, if stitch definition for a particular pattern is something that I'm really going to focus on, I'm going to a high percentage cotton blend to get that really clear, crisp look, because it is a more defined shape of each strand. And do check the proportion of cotton, because it makes a really big difference. Some things that are labelled casually, shall we say, as cotton yarns are actually cotton blends. In fact, there are a lot of cotton blends out there. I really, really like cotton blends. They are fantastic to work with, but the percentage of cotton to acrylic in it and the type of acrylic yarn that's used for those parts of the fibre does make a difference to the overall composition, to the quality and to the feel of the yarn. Don't assume that 100% cotton yarn is going to be overly similar to a 50% cotton yarn. It's a big difference. This is true for everything. I have to put it in here because we've all been stung there before. Do check the dye lot. Nothing is more disappointing than thinking that you need one more skein for a project, picking it up, bringing it home and being like, that is wildly different to the yarn that I'm using. I've been stung like that with wallpaper in the past too. So dye lots in general, just check them, write them down, never forget them. And finally, for our do's, do consider bamboo as the most like-for-like alternative to cotton, mostly. A lot of us are worried about the ecological impact on the environment of what we're doing. We're trying to be more environmentally friendly, and there are big question marks raised about cotton production and the environmental impact of it. Bamboo could be a good one to look into as an alternative, but I'm going to keep using cotton because I don't like the texture of any bamboo that I've ever felt. Just between you and me. Don't assume you can stretch it out. Again, I think many of us who've crocheted for a while have been a little bit stung by this. Wools and acrylic blends, they have this give to them that means that you can shape them with blocking when you pin them out and stretch them up. It means when you turn them into clothes, you can pull them over your head if you've made the head hole a bit too small, wiggle them on. No such give is given by cotton. Cotton is far less elastic. Its stretchy properties are minimal compared to most other types of yarn. It is not going to stretch and shape out, even with concerted blocking, ever as extensively as another brand of yarn can. Now that doesn't need to be a bad thing, but it's a thing you need to be aware of, particularly if you're making clothes or blankets that you want to be a particular size and shape. It also makes it a bit less forgiving of our mistakes, in my view. It's easier to repair, I think, than some other yarns, but it also means that if you've missed a stitch or put an extra one in somewhere, I do think it's more obvious than it is with other yarns like acrylics. Don't forget to check the washing instructions. One of the lively debates that you see around cotton yarn is about how good it is for washing. Yes, it can cope with higher temperatures than some things. Yes, a lot of it will say on the label that you can wash it, hand wash it, or at a low temperature. But on the flip side, a lot of people have more problems with the dye leaching from cotton than they do from acrylic. So all I can say is just run a test. So make a swatch and wash it. That is a bit of a pain and it feels like a bit of a waste of yarn, but if you want to be absolutely sure, check the washing instructions, but ideally make a swatch and wash it before you go into the full big project, particularly if it's clothes. I would tentatively say don't use cotton yarn if you're already having physical problems using acrylic. So take my medical advice with a pinch of salt. However, in my experience, the times that I have struggled with my joints and my fingers and having physical pain from crocheting, and I crochet a lot, has always been related to either huge size yarn or cotton yarn, and it's because of the lack of stretch and give. So I think that if you are having a bit of a bad joints time, if you've got sort of arthritic pains, things like that, my tentative suggestion, and obviously talk to your doctor, is that cotton yarn might not be the best choice for you at that point. I would maybe go with something that's got a bit more stretch, a bit more give, and that you're not going to have to work as hard to keep all your muscles locked and tensed in position. And that relates to my final don't. Don't be careless with your tension. When you are crocheting with cotton yarn, and I'd love to know if it's the same for you, but this is definitely true for me, I have to be more rigid and more tense with my tension. Now, I've been doing this a long time, so my tension is fairly consistent anyway, but I always notice that when I'm working cotton yarn, if I'm distracted chatting, doing something else, and my tension shifts, slightly relaxes in and out as I'm working, or something annoying happens and I tense up a bit, I can visually see those differences in tension in my work much more starkly than if I'm working with acrylic. I would love to know if you agree with my cotton yarn do's or don'ts. It's one of those more like controversial materials in some ways because there's such a breadth of types of cotton yarn and such an extent to which it makes a difference what kind of blend you use, whether it's a high proportion of cotton or less, and just some manufacturers seem to have cottons that are, for reasons that I don't understand at this stage, really quite nasty to work with, whereas others are some of my favourite yarns. What about you? Tell me how you feel about cotton yarn. Let's have a chat in the comments section below, and I can't wait to see you there.